Have you ever heard a story so incredible it sounds like it's straight out of a fantasy novel? A story about a teenage peasant girl who claimed to hear divine voices, led an entire army, and turned the tide of a war that had raged for 100 years. This isn't fiction. This is the real, breathtaking story of Joan of Arc, the girl who terrified an empire. Picture this. It's the early 15th century. France is on its knees. The 100 Years' War against England has been devastating. Large parts of the country are under English control. The French army is demoralized, and the rightful heir to the throne, the Dauphin Charles, is too weak and uncertain to even claim his crown. It seems like the end for France, but in a quiet, unassuming village called Domremy, a young girl named Joan was about to change everything. From around the age of 13, Joan started experiencing something extraordinary. She claimed to see visions and hear the voices of Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. At first, their messages were personal, urging her to be a good and devout girl. But as she grew older, the mission became terrifyingly clear. God was calling her to save France. She was to drive the English out and ensure Charles was crowned king in the city of Reims, the traditional site for coronations. Imagine the sheer audacity of this. A teenage girl with no military training, no political connections, and no wealth, declaring that she had a divine mission to lead the French army. You can picture the reaction. She was dismissed, ridiculed, and told to go home. Her own father tried to stop her, but Joan's conviction was unshakable. Her belief was so powerful, so pure, that it began to persuade others. She traveled to a nearby town to petition the local commander, Robert de Baudricourt, for an escort to see the Dauphin. He laughed her off, twice, but Joan persisted. She started gaining a small following among the local people who were captivated by her piety and her unwavering certainty. Finally, seeing her determination and the growing public support, Baudricourt relented. He gave her a horse and a small escort. Disguised as a man for safety, Joan set off on a perilous 11-day journey across enemy territory to reach Charles at his court in Chinon. When Joan finally arrived, the court was skeptical, to say the least. To test her, they devised a plan. The Dauphin Charles would hide among his courtiers, while another man pretended to be him. But according to the accounts, Joan, who had never seen Charles before, walked straight through the crowded hall, ignored the decoy, and knelt before the true Dauphin, immediately identifying him. This was just the first of many moments that left the court utterly stunned. Still, they weren't fully convinced. Joan was subjected to a lengthy examination by a panel of theologians. They questioned her for weeks, trying to find any hint of heresy or deception. But they found only a simple, unshakable faith. Convinced of her sincerity, and perhaps out of sheer desperation, Charles made a decision that would alter the course of history. He agreed to give Joan a chance. She was given a suit of white armor, a banner that she designed herself, and placed at the head of the French army. Her destination, the city of Orleans, which had been under siege by the English for months. Its fall was considered inevitable, and with it, the rest of France. The French soldiers were exhausted and on the brink of surrender. Then, Joan arrived. She wasn't a traditional commander barking orders. She was a spiritual leader. She banned swearing, insisted on prayer, and rode among the troops with her banner held high, inspiring them with her courage and her absolute belief that God was on their side. Her presence was electrifying. The soldiers, who had been cowering in defeat, were suddenly filled with a renewed sense of purpose. Joan's strategy was simple and direct: attack. She led from the front, fearlessly charging into battle. In one of the key assaults, she was wounded by an arrow to the shoulder. The English cheered, thinking she was finished. But Joan pulled the arrow out herself, had the wound dressed, and returned to the fight, rallying her troops for a final, victorious push. Within just 9 days of her arrival, the seemingly impossible happened. The English siege of Orleans was broken. They retreated in disarray. It was a staggering victory, a turning point in the war that felt nothing short of miraculous. News spread like wildfire. The girl from Domremy was now the Maid of Orleans, a living legend. The French began to believe they could win. More importantly, the English began to believe they could lose. They were terrified of this young girl who seemed to possess some unearthly power. With Orleans secured, Joan insisted on completing the second part of her mission, crowning Charles at Reims. This was another daring move. Reims was deep within English-held territory, but riding the wave of momentum from Orleans, Joan and the army cleared the path, winning a series of stunning victories along the way. On July 17, 1429, with Joan standing proudly by his side, the Dauphin was finally crowned King Charles VII in Reims Cathedral. Joan's divine mission appeared to be complete, but the story doesn't end there. After the coronation, the political situation grew complicated. The king's court was filled with cautious advisors who preferred negotiation over continued warfare. Joan's influence began to wane. She continued to fight, but without the full support of the king, her momentum stalled. Then, in May of 1430, during a minor skirmish, she was captured by Burgundian soldiers who were allies of the English. King Charles, the man she had placed on the throne, made no attempt to rescue or ransom her. It's a sad and debated part of her story. Joan was sold to the English, who were determined to destroy her reputation. They couldn't execute her for defeating them in battle, but they could discredit her and, by extension, King Charles's legitimacy by proving she was a heretic, a witch. She was put on trial for heresy in the city of Rouen. The trial was a sham, a political maneuver disguised as a religious inquiry. For months, she was interrogated by a court of pro-English clergy. They tried to trap her with complex theological questions. But Joan, an uneducated peasant girl, answered with a simple wisdom and courage that often left her accusers speechless. When they asked if she knew she was in God's grace, a trick question, she famously replied, "If I am not, may God put me there? And if I am, may God so keep me." Despite her brilliant defense, the verdict was predetermined. She was found guilty. On May 30th, 1431, at just 19 years old, Joan of Arc was taken to the marketplace in Rouen and burned at the stake. Eyewitnesses said she called on the name of Jesus until her last breath, holding a small cross. To ensure no relics remained, the English gathered her ashes and threw them into the Seine River. They thought they had erased her. They were wrong. Joan's death did not stop the momentum she had started. The French army, inspired by her memory, continued to push back the English. 25 years after her execution, a new trial was authorized by the Pope at the request of King Charles. This posthumous retrial investigated the original proceedings and officially declared Joan innocent, nullifying the verdict and proclaiming her a martyr. Her enemies had tried to brand her a witch, but history would remember her as a hero. Hundreds of years later, in 1920, Joan of Arc was officially canonized as a saint by the Roman Catholic Church. The peasant girl who heard voices became Saint Joan, the patron saint of France. Her story continues to captivate us because it's a story about the power of faith, courage, and the extraordinary potential that lies within a single individual to change the world. She terrified an empire not with swords or strategy alone, but with the one thing they couldn't fight: unshakable belief. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this story as incredible as I do, please give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next journey into history. See you next time.